Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Line Blast podcast. I'm your host, Biringer, co-host Matthew Blittner. Back again, episode 3 here for you. A lot of news to cover in the National Hockey League as the Stanley Cup playoffs continue to roll on. Got some coaching news, GM searches, and the hot player continues his hot streak. Matthew, welcome back.
Great to be back for a third week. We're really starting to gain some traction here. We've got 2 great guests coming up on today's show. And, Jim, I'm really getting sick and tired of the constant coaching retreads that, with the constant coaching news that's going on around the National Hockey League. Like, seriously, I guess I'm going to take the lead right now on this because, I'm just all fired up over this. Like, and then we'll get to Mike Sullivan in a few minutes, but what the hell are the Ducks doing? I mean, like, seriously, I know Joel Quenneville, he's been reinstated. I know that, he brings the winning pedigree and all that. And I know hockey coaches, it's an all-boys club. But what are we doing? It's 2025. Like, how are you bringing Joel Quenneville in? Yes, Anaheim is a small market compared to, let's say, LA or New York or something like that. But how are you bringing him back on this? I know Bowman came back to Edmonton. That was a mistake, but okay, whatever. GMs, generally are not, front-facing people. They're always, behind the scenes. But a coach is basically the spokesman for a team. What are they doing? Seriously, like, how are you bringing back Joel Quenneville after everything that happened? I know he's spoken with Kyle Beach, and Beach has forgiven him, but that should have been a one-way ticket out of the National Hockey League.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I was very surprised by this move by the Anaheim Ducks. I was a big proponent of David Carl for this position, similar to what you saw with John Cooper in Tampa. You have a young group that's ready to take the next step. You also have a young group that can grow together and grow and develop. And you saw that with Cooper when he came in and he did it. He went through the ranks with all those players. So I understand a different situation. I also understood David Carl was probably not coming just because of his comments after the World Juniors when he talked about staying in Denver and building a legacy. And he doesn't need to go to a place where, he could basically be the coach for life until he decides that he doesn't want to coach anymore with Denver. So didn't make sense. But I also didn't look. I get the players didn't like playing for Greg Cronin. I get that, but they had a 21-point jump in the standings. They really took a leap. But it also makes me question what Pat Verbeek, as the general manager, has been doing with this team. Because yes, you have questions with Trevor Zegras and other players on this roster, but to bring in a guy like Joel Quenneville, and you're saying your team's ready to make the playoffs and you expect to make the playoffs the next season, to me, A, you're not reading your own division, and B, you're not reading the other division because the Ducks are not a playoff team next year, even with Joel Quenneville.
No, forget playoffs. To quote the famous commercial, playoffs. We're talking about playoffs for the Anaheim Ducks.
Apparently, Pat Verbeek is thinking playoffs.
Listen, Pat Verbeek, take it from us, and what are just 2 sports writers with a podcast? No, but Anaheim Ducks are not close to making the playoffs, okay? You're not anywhere close, not even with the 21-point jump. You think Joel Quenneville's going to make that difference when he's always shown that he favors veterans? What veterans are on the Ducks that are all of a sudden going to lead you to the promised land of the playoffs? What veterans are out there that you're going to convince to come? What veterans are going to listen to Joel Quenneville after all the fallout from Chicago? Like, seriously, read the damn room. Like, you cannot tell me that Joel Quenneville was the best option for the Anaheim Ducks. Like, he's not. Even if you want to say, okay, forget about the scandal, which is very difficult to move away from. But, okay, let's put the scandal in a box for a minute. He does well with veteran-laden teams, which the Ducks are not. He does well when the foundation has already been laid of a consistent team, and he just needs to, put those little spices on top to take a good meal and turn it into a great meal. That's not what the Ducks are. Like, what are you doing? You know it's going to be a major story throughout the year. You know the few veterans on the team are not going to listen to him after everything. And you think the young players with this generation, the way this generation has been raised, with the way this generation is, you think they're all of a sudden going to respect Joel Quenneville? And you think he's going to somehow be there for the next 3, 4, 5 years? You're out of your mind.
I got a blue line blast for you. I think.
Really? Joel I thought that was a blue line blast.
No, because I got one better for you. I think Joel Quenneville will be this year's Mike Babcock. He won't even see the regular season.
That is a scorching hot take. That's probably like a 98-mile-an-hour slapper from the blue line. But I am going to disagree with you only because with how little media attention Anaheim gets, I don't see them pulling that trigger a la Mike Babcock in Columbus. Like, unless Quenneville actually goes out and commits the assault act, which he's not going to because that's not him. His act was covering up an assault. So, like, unless he goes out and actually assaults someone, like, he's going to make it to the beginning of the season. Like, how far into the season he goes, I don't know. But he's not going to be Babcock in this situation just because he's not going to be that stupid. Like, he just won't.
You never know. I mean, look, Columbus was a small market, and I know, they have more media coverage than, Anaheim does, but they didn't have a lot like the metro area like we do or, other places. But it was kind of shocking to find out that that's what was going to happen with him. Again, you mentioned it perfectly. Today's player. There's a reason why Cutter Gauthier didn't want to stay in Philadelphia. Like, let's be honest. We know who the coach was. Like, he didn't want to sign in Philadelphia because John Tortorella was there. You think he wants to play under Joel Quenneville? I'm not sure about that. Trevor Zegras, is he even a Pat Verbeek guy? Who's your goaltender? Is it Lucas Dostal? Is it John Gibson? Are you going to move out those guys? And with Joel Quenneville, can he adapt to today's day and age player? Right? Yeah, you had 2 superstars in Chicago, 3 realistically with Keefe, Duncan Keefe. And you in Anaheim, it's Mason McTavish is there. Like I said, Zegras is there. It's more of a young team that's still developing. They're not in that mode where Chicago was, where he was, where they were drafting these high-end players that were ready to come in, and then boom, they made a conference final in 2009, and then they won the cup. Anaheim's a long ways away from doing any of that.
You gave a blue line blast. I'm going to give one too, and I wonder what the miles per hour that you think it is after I say it. If I was Pat Verbeek, and thank goodness I'm not.
No.
If I was Pat Verbeek, there are 2 coaches. If you want to stick with the retreads, and I do apologize for calling them retreads because, that makes it sound like they're just not good people. If you're going to stick with people who have already been NHL coaches, these are the 2 people who I would have hired, one of the 2 of them, either of them, to be the new head coach of the Anaheim Ducks. John Tortorella, who has historically thrived with taking that young team that's ready to take another step forward and really instilling something in them, or I would have taken David Quinn out of his assistant position in Pittsburgh, and I would have made him David Quinn. That would have been the team that he finally leads and takes them to not a championship, but takes them up a level. Because David Quinn, young team, he's got the right attitude to deal with them. Those would have been one of the 2 people I would have hired to be the new head coach of the Anaheim Ducks, not Joel Quenneville.
Man, we're throwing heaters tonight. Like, this is a hockey podcast. This slap shots, heaters. We're throwing both coming in with like 98, 99 mile an hour bombs. Like, I didn't expect to hear David Quinn's name or John Tortorella's name just because of history with Gauthier, but it makes sense. I thought you were going to go Jay Woodcroft, to be honest. I thought that was going to be the guy. Anaheim went with. I just felt like Woodcroft would have been a good fit, similar like style with Edmonton. I think he would have fit there. I thought he was going to fit well there with the Anaheim Ducks. I just think if you're going to go in that direction, I think Jay Woodcroft would have been the guy for me, just because you can grow with that team. I just don't think Joel Quenneville's the right fit for this group. That, again, yes, they didn't like the coach. Yes, they won and improved in spite of Cronin, but they were playing well. And I just don't think the change was really necessary.
Look, you want to talk not liking coaches? New York Rangers didn't like their coaches.
No.
Three coaches over the last 4 years, okay? They didn't like David Quinn because he wanted them to play hard-nosed, straight edge, non-pretty hockey. They didn't like Gerard Gallant because he wanted them to play hard-nosed, straight edge, non-pretty hockey, and he was laissez-faire in terms of how he dealt with the players, letting the inmates run the asylum. They didn't like Peter Laviolette because he overcoached them and wanted them to play a certain way, hard-nosed, straight-edge, non-pretty hockey. And he, was more hands-on than Gallant, but evidently too hands-on for the players. You want to talk not liking your coach? The New York Rangers are the ones who don't like their coach. Anaheim Ducks, by all means, they liked their coach compared to the New York Rangers players. And now the Rangers bring in Mike Sullivan, who, okay, he has a history with JT Miller. He has a history with Chris Kreider, both dating back to when he was an assistant under Tortorella. Is he really going to be the guy in New York to turn things around? I don't see it. And it has nothing to do with Sullivan potentially not being a great coach. We know he's a very good coach. I don't know if I would call him a great coach.
That's debatable.
You still had talent in Pittsburgh the last 3 years, and you still couldn't make the playoffs. Not that Pittsburgh had a great roster, but you still had enough there to, be like a first-round fodder type of playoff team, and they couldn't make it. Now, again, it's not all on him. I'm not going to put that all on Sullivan. But you really think Mike Sullivan is going to be the one to all of a sudden get Mika Zibanejad and Artemi Panarin, if they're even both still on the team, to stop playing, pretty East-West hockey and get them to actually pay attention to defense? You think he's going to be the one to all of a sudden get, the most out of the defense? He's going to be the one to all of a sudden get the team to give a consistent 60-minute effort? We're going to talk, and I'm going to give a spoiler alert now. We're going to talk later on this show with Mike Morreale from NHL.com and Kristy Flannery from the Hockey News about how the Devils need to give more effort in their games. Mike Sullivan is not going to be the guy to get more effort out of this current New York Rangers roster. It's not going to happen, okay? That is so far away from what is going to happen. I think, honestly, what the Rangers and the Ranger fans are hoping for most is this parallel. And this is a parallel that I've seen all over social media ever since they announced his hiring. 1991-92, Rangers win the President's Trophy. They lose in the playoffs. They don't even make it to the top final. 92-93, coming off of the President's Trophy, they have an abysmal year. They miss the playoffs. 93-94, they win the President's Trophy with a new head coach with the first name Mike Keenan, obviously, and they go on and win the Stanley Cup. So now the Rangers win the President's Trophy under Peter Laviolette in his first year. They get knocked out before reaching the Cup final. They have an abysmal year this year, miss the playoffs. Now they're bringing in a new head coach with the first name Mike, this one by Mike Sullivan, and they're hoping that somehow parallel, if you want to call it that, is going to be what then somehow propels them to a Stanley Cup championship. Jim, this is not a Stanley Cup championship bound team. It's just not.
No, it's not. 100% it's not. This roster is not even close to being a Stanley championship roster. They don't have the talent that the Rangers back then had coming off a missed season after losing in the second round of 91-92 to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are eventually the Stanley Cup champions, right? They don't have that talent. They don't have that effort. They don't have that heart. What did Gallant and Laviolette preach before they got fired? It's not about the talent. It's about the effort and the heart, like you said. And Mike Sullivan, look, I think he's a good coach. But again, it's a what have you done for me lately world. He hasn't won the Stanley Cup since 2017. And he did it back times 2016, 2017. It's 8 years ago, right? Like, that's a while in this league. 8 years is a long time. Last playoff series victory, 2018. Penguins then lost to the eventual Stanley Cup champions, Washington Capitals. After that, first round loss, Islanders. Lost to an inferior Montreal Canadiens team in the Stanley Cup bubble in 2020. Lost to the Islanders. Lost to the Rangers, first round. Didn't make the playoffs, 2023, 2024, 2025. Was instrumental in keeping Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh when the team wanted to move on from him. Poor coaching decisions down the stretch, defensive-minded coach, but the team that had leads, they lost to teams in 2023 that they had no business losing to. Oh, and let's not forget the Four Nations fiasco that we both saw firsthand, where he scratches Kyle Connor in favor of Chris Kreider in the final. There are some personnel decision-making throughout this that tells me that the Rangers are just the same old Rangers. We like the guy. We wanted the guy. This is the guy we've always wanted, without doing their due diligence to seeing what else is out there to help this team. Because let's be honest, if you're going to tear the roster down and the team was open for business last year, you might as well just start over.
So I'm going to push back on one thing that you said. I agree with you on 99% of what you said, but I'm going to push back on one thing, okay? You just said how, with the Rangers, they are not, cut this. You just said something, and I just lost it on what on what you said with the what were some of the things that you were just saying with Sullivan?
All right, I said Sullivan hasn't made the playoffs. Hasn't won championships since 2016. After that. Oh, defensive players. He kept Jarry around. The head scratching decision with Kyle Connor at Four Nations. This isn't a championship roster. If you were going to do it, there were other coaches that you wanted to do it.
Yeah. Maybe that's the point I was going to make. All right, so. All right, Jim, there's one thing I'm going to push back on, okay? I agree 99% of what you said, but there's one thing I'm going to push back on. The Rangers, over the last 3-4 years, have indeed done their due diligence on who is out there, okay? They took a very long time interviewing people before hiring Gerard Gallant because they wanted Sullivan and he wasn't available. They wanted Sullivan after they fired Gallant. He wasn't available. They went through a long process before settling on Peter Laviolette. If there's any team in the league who knows who is out there right now, it is the New York Rangers, with how much coaching turnover they've had and how many people they've spoken to. Now, again, I agree 99% everything else that you said, but they know who's out there, okay? This is a team, if you want to give them any credit whatsoever, they know who's out there, all right? They've spoken to everyone under the sun. They know who's out there. They might not be liking everyone who's out there, as clearly evidenced, but they at least know who's out there.
No, that's fair. That's a fair point. I'll give you that one in your little column there. If we're doing wins and losses, all right, I'll give you that one. But look, to be honest, they had the guy. They let the guy go. He's up in Edmonton right now. Chris Knobloch is doing a fantastic job with the Edmonton Oilers. That was the guy, to me, that they always should have gone to. But again, is Chris Drury running the show? James Dolan, ownership? Is there outside influences that we don't know about? I think so. But again, Chris Drury's got a new extension. The players don't like the GM. Again, it's another team where, the talent's there, but what's the roster going to look like? Because there could be some changes for Mike Sullivan and this roster. Could a guy like Chris Kreider be gone? Zibanejad, Panarin? Like, there's a lot of question marks with this team. Again, I'm not in the room with the Rangers. I'm not the GM. I'm playing armchair GM here. Mike Sullivan's not going to be my first choice if I'm going to be very, very honest with you.
No, in fact, you mentioned Jay Woodcroft earlier for Edmonton. I would have hired Jay Woodcroft to be the head coach of the Rangers. Sort of veteran team, but sort of a young team, similar to Edmonton when he took over Edmonton. Similar in regards to they don't play defense well, but they have some talent. Not a lot, but they have some. He turned Edmonton around. He could have worked in New York.
Yeah, 100% he could have worked. Could have worked at a lot of places. I mean, we all know he was probably up for the Devils job last year before Sheldon Keefe became available. Again, I think he deserves a second look. If we're looking at some of these coaches that, I don't want to, again, like you said, don't want to call retreads, but again, they've coached before on their second or third time going around the team. I would have liked to seen Jay Woodcroft. He'll still land the spot. There's a bunch of openings. Again, Philly's there. Seattle's there. Anaheim's filled. Boston's still out there. Vancouver's out there. So maybe he lands on his feet someplace. Pittsburgh, what are they going to do there as well? But again, Mike Sullivan's not my first choice in New York. But again, Chris Drury just wants to – it feels like the Rangers are taking a path that the Oilers took so many years ago, and that didn't work out, just going back to what, nostalgia, old names, guys that were in the organization, just didn't seem to work for Edmonton, and they had to go outside the past to get things to work for them. And right now, you're going to have a coach that believes in the young players because their veterans are just not getting it done right now. And Sullivan has to lean heavily into those young guys.
All great points, Jim. And, it's time we move on from the coaches here. Otherwise, we're going to pick off a lot of the coaches who we would talk to on a day-to-day basis.
It's very true. It's very true.
So there is something that I want to say here. There is, we're talking about all these second chances and, how all these coaches, they get a second chance and this and that. You know who is probably extremely grateful for second chances right now? The Dallas Stars. Okay. Mikko Rantanen, he was shoved away by Colorado Avalanche for reasons that, it's just mind-boggling. Former players are coming out currently and still ripping their former team all about it. They trade him to Carolina. It doesn't work out. So second chance trade, he gets traded then shockingly again to Dallas. Dallas must be saying this is the greatest second chance in the history of second chances. So in his last 6 games, okay, dating back to Game 5 against Colorado in the first round, Mikko Rantanen has, wait for it, 17 points, 9 goals, 8 assists, 2 hat tricks, and 2 record-tying 4-point periods. If Dallas continues to ride this wave, if Rantanen continues to stay hot, and there's no reason that he won't, if Dallas rides this wave all the way to the Cup final, Rantanen's running away with the Conn Smythe Trophy.
Oh, yeah, that's a lock. I think that's the biggest lock in the world right now in the National Hockey League, in the Stanley Cup playoffs. If the Dallas Stars make the Cup final, even if they lose, he's winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. What he's done this postseason has been historic. Mikko Rantanen has factored in, I believe, 15 of the last 17 Dallas Stars goals. Like you mentioned it, you put all the accolades out there. He leads the NHL, 18 points currently, right? McDavid still has to play his game. We'll see if he can tie him or pass him again, right? 9 goals, 9 assists. But again, Colorado traded this guy to Carolina, and as we'll mention, down the line, we've mentioned this before, we've talked about it, everybody's talked about it. He just never fit in with Carolina. That's not the style of play that works for him. He's got a player that can go north-south. He can trail the play. He can drive the play. He can take over games. It's a faster system under Pete DeBoer than it is with Rod Brindamore, who likes this this aggressive forecheck kind of defensive system. He just never fit into Carolina. He didn't want to go there. Let's be honest. He just didn't want to go there. And he was shockingly, he got traded from Colorado. And then Nazem Kadri says, he's just like, yeah, you don't get rid of your big dogs. And he's right. You don't. And look, he took out his old team. It's the revenge tour. And you'll like this reference. It's the Ricky Vaughn Major League. I'm going to stick it down your throat. That's what he's doing right now. And he's having a heck of a playoff right now for the Dallas Stars. Dallas Stars are not in this position without Mikko Rantanen because right now, the rest of the team is starting to score and play well. But without Mikko Rantanen, the Dallas Stars are not even in this position.
No, look, Dallas Stars don't get out of the first round without Mikko Rantanen. And if I'm telling you right now, Mikko Rantanen is going to be the one who causes Connor Hellebuyck to be knocked out of a game, to be pulled. Now, we've seen Connor Hellebuyck get pulled a number of times already in this postseason. Game 4 is coming up tonight, I believe. And he's 0-8 in his last 8 playoff games dating back to last year's playoffs, Connor Hellebuyck. He's 0-4 this year. He has a goals against average this year well over 6. He has a save percentage of like 772 on the road. Road stats. Forget about home stats. They need to bench him. And I'm telling you right now, Mikko Rantanen, it's like the perfect storm. They're facing each other. Mikko Rantanen is going to be the person who knocks Connor Hellebuyck out of game 4 and then potentially gets Connor Hellebuyck benched. Okay? That is, I'm going to put that down right now as another blue line blast for this show. That is what is going to happen in my hot take opinion. Mikko Rantanen is going to put Connor Hellebuyck on the bench.
Look, so I said this in another place. I was asked my opinion during the Winnipeg Jets St. Louis Blues series because I made the comparison to what Hellebuyck was going through to what happened to Roberto Luongo in 2011 in the Stanley Cup final. And I said in that final, I had said Corey Schneider should play game 6 in Boston just to give the Boston Bruins a different look. I knew this was never going to happen, but I advocated for Eric Comrie to start game 6 for the Winnipeg Jets in the first round against St. Louis, knowing you had game 7 at home. I'm not in disagreement with this. As much as I want to be like, hey, you know what? It's the Vezina Trophy winner. He's going to win his 3rd one. You got to let him work through it. We saw what Edmonton went through. If your guy ain't going, you pull the hook and you put the other guy in, and maybe it gives the team confidence to play some defense. Because, look, and I've been told by some people, hey, it's easy. It's the national narrative. The team in front of him isn't playing good. There were goals in game 3. Look, Connor Hellebuyck didn't play a bad road game. The Jets got rattled after that controversial Alexander Petrovic goal, whether it was kicked in, propelled in, deflected in, whatever you want to say. They got rattled and that Mikko Rantanen scored 42 seconds later. But then on the Wyatt Johnson goal, Connor Hellebuyck makes 3-4 saves, and then the 5th one goes in because he got 3 guys watching. Like, that can't happen either. You need your goaltender to make a save here. But again, you need the rest of the team to help you, and the Jets are 0-8 in their last 8 road games. Connor Hellebuyck hasn't played well in any of them. The team hasn't either. But I agree with you. I think if Mikko Rantanen and the Dallas Stars light him up on a road and you go home, why not make the change if you're down 3-1 in the series?
Look, I'm going to give a spoiler alert right now for something for my weekly Blittner's Blue Line column over on sportsology.com. I wrote how Connor Hellebuyck is, if you watch his stats, if you look at everything, if you watch how he's played, and yes, the team in front of him has not played well, but you need to sit him down just so he can get his head straight before this becomes irreversible.
Yeah.
Okay. How many times do players in any sport have their confidence shaken to the point where then ruins them permanently going forward. Now, we're not quite at the permanent ruin just yet with Connor Hellebuyck. But if he gets destroyed again on the road in Game 4, you mean to tell me it's already mental, and it's already
100% is,
and it's already a big story. It's going to become an already bigger story. You need to sit him down just to give him a mental reset. Otherwise, it is going to become irreversible, and you're going to take one of the truly great goaltenders of this generation and destroy him moving forward. Like, you cannot have that done. In his last 8 road games, and I looked this up, and again, you can see this in my Blittner's Blue Line column. Jim, he's given up at least 4 goals in all 8 games. In those 8 games, he's given up at least 5-7 times. We're not talking about him losing hard luck 2-1 games.
no.
We're not talking about him losing hard luck 1-0 his team didn't score. We're not talking about, it's 2-2 going into overtime, a breakaway that he couldn't stop and his team loses 3-2. He's getting shelled. And yes, his team's not playing well in front of him, but you can't say that about every single one of those goals that he's given up. You just can't. You look at the reel, you look at the tape, there are goals that he needs to be making saves on, and he's not doing it. And I saw this stat, I think it was Sportsnet tweeted this out the other day. In the regular season this year, Connor Hellebuyck only gave up 3 goals on the first shot he faced. He's done that 4 times in the playoffs already this year in a fraction of the games played.
That's unbelievable. For the best goalie in the world, so-called best goalie in the world, which is always debatable, but right now it's the best goalie in the world. To do that on your first shot is not very good, and it puts your team behind the 8 ball real quick, especially in the playoffs, especially against a team like the Dallas Stars. Like I said, I thought the Winnipeg Jets played a really good road game up until that Petrovic goal, which, again, can be debated on whether it was kicked in, propelled in, deflected, whether he made a play on it. We can debate that into the blue in their face and look at the rule book 6 ways to Sunday. And we still could be waiting longer than Freeburg goes off like it did in the Dallas Stars building the other night. But the Winnipeg Jets need their goaltender to make a save on the first shot because that's deflating to them mentally too. And you're clearly seeing it in their play. Yes, they came back. But again, I'll point to those 2 goals in 42 seconds. You can't let that little, controversial goal take you out of the game like that. And it took the Winnipeg Jets right out of game 3, and it was over. It was over, and the Dallas Stars are up 2-1 in that series. And now the Jets have to win a game on the road. They haven't won one yet. They need to go Florida Panthers style on the road or Carolina Hurricanes style on the road, dominate the game, and Connor Hellebuyck has to be the best player.
You know what, Jim? I'm going to stop us right there because we have Mike Morreale joining us in just a moment. But when we come back after talking with Mike, I want to get to that point about Florida and Toronto because there is something very interesting we need to talk about in that series.
Hello, everyone. We have our special guest, Mike Morreale of NHL.com, here on the Blue Line Blast podcast. Jim Biringer and Matthew Blittner here. Mike, thank you for coming on and joining us today.
Always a pleasure to join you guys. I'm happy to talk hockey whenever I can. We're in the thick of the playoffs right now. A lot of stuff happening, coaching vacancies, GMs to be named, the NHL Combine in Buffalo, the NHL Draft in LA. Just a few things going on, Jim. Just a few.
A lot of things going on, and I guess we should start and maybe do a big-time wrap here real quick with the New Jersey Devils, too. They had some interesting comments come out last week in regards to their roster for next year, and Tom Fitzgerald made a big statement saying that this group will not be the same group for next season. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, well, we were thinking about what was going to happen at this presser, right? What after the end of the season, we could have gone the injuries, right? And what transpired towards the end of the season with the Devils and the rash of injuries they'd had, particularly Jack Hughes. You look at Luke Hughes, Brendan Dillon. Obviously, Siegenthaler came back, wasn't 100%, and he was thrown right into the mix, Kovacevic. So there was a lot there that the Devils lost. So were they going to go down the route of, well, it was kind of an incomplete season? They did not. And in fact, when I actually asked Sheldon Keefe that specifically, do you feel it was somewhat of an incomplete season considering all the injuries at the end? He kind of looked at me, odd faced and said, no. He goes, I completed my season. We just didn't get it done in the end, despite the injuries. So when asked about it, what needs to be done to get over the hump with the depth, with the scoring, with the D in the playoffs, Fitzgerald came out, and as you said, James, pulled no punches about it. We've got decisions to make on certain players, and he said, I can tell you that because it just wasn't good enough. We're not coming back with the same group here in 25-26. So what are my thoughts? Well, I think that there will be decisions made, players that were here and that maybe that bottom six, middle six, you're not going to see next season. The Devils do have some players coming up in the system that probably they're going to give some chances to. I speak, Anton Silyev is not, but Gritsev, the other Russian player, there's a good chance he's going to make some type of an impact in training camp. We'll see where he's at. So, Devils want to go young, but they still want to have that veteran leadership there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the offseason goes along, who Fitzgerald's going to acquire, and which players are going to have that impact in training camp.
Now, it's curious what you said, Mike, about, everything that the Devils have said. They didn't use the injury excuse, obviously, so they're taking accountability for their season. They're not using the excuse, which shows a level of maturity, not just in the players, but obviously in the coaching staff and front office. But was it surprising that they then, one of their first changes was to get rid of a couple of their assistant coaches? I mean, by all means, their defense and penalty kill were not the issue this season. I mean, there were parts of the year where maybe they looked a little bit disjointed, but for the most part, that wasn't the problem this year. The problem was that they couldn't score consistently. So was that the shock that they all of a sudden, that's the first major change that they made?
Well, I think that happens with every new coach that comes aboard. Obviously, the coaches that were let go were holdovers from, Lindy Ruff and Travis Green. And obviously, coming in, Sheldon Keefe kept most of those assistants on board. I thought they did a fabulous job, as you said, Matt. There was no problems there with the penalty kill and power play, except if you want to look at it from a playoff point of view, the power play struggled a bit to really gain traction, and it was a key area that the Devils, lost in because it was special teams that they had to take advantage of against the Carolina Hurricanes. You're seeing how strong a team Carolina is right now. Washington is feeling it, down 2-1 in their series, but it wasn't too much of a surprise to me. I gotta level with you and be honest. I think it's at a point where Keefe, he's established himself now, as he said in his presser. He laid the foundation down of what he wants to see. Now it's a matter of just being consistent with that foundation and showing that they can get it done with the players they have. And if there's players missing in the lineup, that the next guy up can just play that same type of style. With that said, I think Keefe's going to go out now and with Tom Fitzgerald, and they'll seek the assistant coaches that maybe conform even better with what Keefe wants to stress, what he wants to teach, and how he wants to develop his program.
Mike, you mentioned the roster before. We talked about it, what Tom Fitzgerald said. And you make hard decisions, and maybe some of those hard decisions have to come down to guys like Dawson Mercer, a guy like Eric Haula, guys that have term left on their deals and money, because the Devils, let's be honest, are still up against the salary cap. And if they want to make a big splash this summer and really change this roster, they're going to have to open up some money. Would you agree with that?
Somewhat. I mean, you don't want to change the chemistry too much. Look, look, Jim, I totally get it if, Devils fans and they have a right to be a little impatient. They want to see this team succeed. That's, we're talking diehard fans here that want to see the team succeed. You want to spend the money properly. And I think Tom Fitzgerald said something that was ear perking during the presser, and that was, players have to want to be in Jersey as well. I mean, as much as it is the team going out and trying to find these free agents, you want a player that's going to be receptive and want to play for your organization. I think Mikko Rantanen is a prime example of how things can go a little haywire, right? When Carolina brings him in. So players have to really fit the type of system that a coach is trying to implement. And, Keefe has his style and his ways and what he wants to see out of players. I'm sure a lot of the players around the league know what that style will be. Now, Jersey's also a great place to play. Let's face it. They got the practice rink next door. Everything is nearby. You got New York City. So it's an inviting place for a lot of players that are willing to make the jump. And I think if those players are willing, that fit and conform to the style that the Devils want to play, I think they will be here. But yeah, there are some decisions on some key players, particularly, you got some UFAs that decisions have to be made on. Obviously, you want to get RFA Luke Hughes back and loaded with the Devils this year, and I'm sure that's something they're going to be working on from the get-go here. So Jake Allen, he's a UFA. I thought Jake played really well this year, so that's going to be a little bit of a tough decision. Do you want a veteran? Is Nico Dawes, has he shown you enough to play that backup role to Jacob Markstrom in 25-26? These are big questions. So in addition, James, to maybe finding those free agents that are going to fit in maybe that second line role, maybe alongside obviously Jack Hughes needs that another big winger there, right? He needs someone that's going to dig, that's going to grind, that's going to help him get pucks, to be in position to score, and to maybe not have to do a lot of the lugging either in front of the net and behind the net and along the yellow in the corners. So some decisions need to be made, but I agree with you. If there is a player or two to be had there, you have to spend the money and get it done, because I think the Devils right now have a team, and they showed that in the playoffs, despite all the losses that they had, that they can get it done.
And, in the playoffs, obviously, they didn't win the series. It wasn't even close from the number perspective. I mean, there were some games where obviously it did feel like it could have gone either way, a couple double overtime games, which they did win one of, actually. But when looking at the rest of the playoff field that is still here, that is still active in the second round, what is your take on how the Devils can get to that next step? Seeing, Carolina is doing things a lot of people didn't expect them to do this against Washington, and yet somehow, some way they are. Toronto, a lot of people are always skeptical that, it's Toronto, they can't get out of the first round, or playoff futility. But now I know it's a 2-2 series. They blew a 2-0 lead, but they're still very much in that series with Florida. You look at Edmonton and Vegas. You look at what Mikko Rantanen is doing in Dallas. What do the Devils need to get that next step to be like the teams who are still currently playing?
Yeah, I think we were kind of ripped off a little bit, Matt. The fact that we didn't see a full lineup for the Devils against Carolina. And look, Carolina was a tough draw. Carolina would be a tough draw for any team, particularly first round. But I do think the Devils, they did, with the exception of game one, I think the Devils did hold their own against Carolina. As you said, 2 double overtime games. The games were close, leading into maybe the third period of the other games. So that's one aspect you can say, is that if they had a healthy Jack Hughes, if they had a healthy defensive unit, maybe things would have gone a little different. Maybe we would have went to 6 or 7 games in that series. Maybe they would have even won, because the reason I say that is because Jacob Markstrom was playing out of his head. And that was the one thing that the Devils needed that you didn't see in previous playoff seasons, was the goaltending, the consistent goaltending was there for the Devils when they needed it. Now, the second period of Game 5 from Markstrom, I'm sure he wishes he had back, but third period and overtimes, he was playing extraordinary for the Devils. So what do they need to do? I think you can just tinker with this lineup a little. They got some big pieces here, right, Matt? You know that, Jim, you've seen it. I think Timo Meier really, stepped up this year. And as you mentioned before, Jim, about, Dawson Mercer, he needed to play a center role in the playoffs. I thought he did a good job. He's always been a great PK guy. Where is he going to fit in if they do get some key pieces here? Maybe he gets, plays on that third line role, type of checking role, or he can stay in a second line role. But I think you need those heavy players. I think they still need skill and speed that they've shown. And I know that that's what Keefe wants. He wants some responsibility out of his players, those forwards, in their own end of the ice too, to help transport pucks. And when the puck is in the opposing end, he's a big advocate of just maintaining possession here. Maybe one or two players coming back, making the line changes, just consistently wear teams down. And when the Devils were at their best, that's what they were able to do. So that's what he wants to. That's what Fitzgerald and Keefe want in this lineup. Players that are willing to go full bore, once they're in the offensive zone, but make sure that their own end of the ice is secure as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it around the Stanley Cup playoffs, and something that stuck out to me, even going back to the preseason, listening to what Jim Hiller said with the Los Angeles Kings when they took on the Florida Panthers, that the Florida Panthers are the standard on how to play in the National Hockey League, and we're seeing it. And, it kind of reminds me of how the Devils used to play in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and everybody called it boring. But it wins championships, and we're seeing that. And I think the biggest thing for New Jersey and the biggest takeaway to me is they have to be consistent through 60 minutes, and they can't let those little quick goals and those little mental lapses happen throughout the entire game. Like, it just seems like every year we talk about those mental lapses that, they just can't overcome, and it just snowballs. So I think that, to me, is something that they have to overcome next season.
Yeah, and that was the thing, right, Jim? It's like, if the Devils weren't playing at 110% every shift, you saw breakdowns. You saw a little bit of an opening for the Carolina Panthers to take advantage of. Because when the Devils were on their game, like that first period of Game 2, even, and they lost Game 2 eventually, but that first period of Game 2, everyone was like, wow, like the Devils were just all over the Hurricanes. And then, second period rolled around. I think they thought things were going to remain the same, and Carolina just pushed the pace, pushed the button. Whatever Brind'Amour said at the intermission worked, and they went on to win that game. But and Keefe did mention the fact that, if we're not playing at 100%, it's going to be difficult for us to win periods, to win games. And that's what you saw. Now, maybe a couple pieces here and there will help alleviate that a little bit. Obviously, the goaltending did. I thought Markstrom was great this year. But you did refer to the Florida Panthers. And, for the Panthers to go down 2-0 to the Toronto Maple Leafs in their second round series here, and the players even mentioned this for Florida. Like, they felt as though they maybe underestimated the Leafs group, and kudos to them because they were able to get it done and even up the series. They just controlled play in Game 2 with the shutout win there. If it wasn't for Joe Wall, the Panthers probably would have had 6 or 7 goals in that game. So look, they're the defending champ. They've been here before. They've seen a lot of this that's gone on. They know how to take it. Paul Maurice, the coach, knows how to take advantage of home ice because he did that. And these are things eventually that I think Sheldon Keefe's going to come around and see, the benefits of having these elite players that he does have on his team, and really that have to take the bull by the horns, because in the end, you guys know this, you need your star players to really come up big in the postseason. Not every game, but there are times when you need them to push the pace and push it hard. Jesper Bratt was playing injured, right? We found that later on that he had shoulder surgery after the postseason. So you can see, like, yeah, Brada was great during the regular season. Maybe there was a little bit of a letdown in the playoffs. He still pushed, and you could see Brada pushing. And I thought this was one of his best, playoff efforts this entire series against Carolina. Austin Matthews, for instance, he only has like 3 goals, and I think his last 19 playoff games, 18, 19 playoff games. Austin needs to step it up. But again, it looks like he's fighting something. There's something off with Austin Matthews right now. Might be an injury. So, yeah, these are things that the Devils have to look into, make sure that it doesn't happen again. I mean, obviously the injuries really killed him here at the end. But, yeah, I mean, we'll see what they can do in the offseason to kind of build this roster, build this lineup.
Yeah, so Mike, it's all great, everything that the analysis that you're giving here, and we don't want to take up, too much more of your time here. But, if there's one thing that, you would say to Devils fans to make sure that they are feeling confident for next season, because, I've spoken to a lot of Devils fans, and a lot of them almost feel like the world is ending, so to speak, or they felt that during the series against Carolina. What would be that one thing that you would tell them so that way they're loyal fans, but, they do have doubts just like any other fan base. So what would you tell them to be confident for next season?
I tell them that Sheldon Keefe has gone through his season here. He sees what needs to be done to rectify the mistakes that maybe he made, that the players struggled with. And I point to Matt, prior to Christmas, and we all know this, the record that the Devils had. I mean, I think they were second or third in the league as far as points go. They were playing so well. And then it was after that holiday break that they started to struggle. Now, and Tom Fitzgerald pointed this out, right? They still didn't win. They won 3 games in a row, maybe a couple times last year, but they couldn't get over the hump to win 4 or 5 or 6 games in a row. That has to change too. You need to get on streaks here to help yourself, further yourself from the pack to maybe get that home ice advantage in the postseason. So they need to go on some win streaks as well. And these are all things that were discussed in the post-game presser. Sheldon Keefe said this is something he needs to work on, and when he says he's going to work on it, it's going to be done. And I think Tom Fitzgerald is going to be true to his mark and say that changes are going to be made, so we're going to see new bodies in the lineup next year. In addition to Sheldon Keefe wanting to make this team better, I think there's a lot to look forward to in 25-26, Matt.
Well, Mike, like Matt said, we don't want to take up too much of your time. We appreciate you joining the Blue Line Blast podcast here. We get you on again to break down more of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks a lot, boys. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, you too.
And we're back talking. We had great Mike Morreale from NHL.com here with us. Hope you guys enjoyed it because we're loaded with guests here on the Blue Line Blast podcast. You mentioned Florida and Toronto. That series tied 2-2. Florida. The home team won all 4 games, interesting enough. But the Florida Panthers, we mentioned goaltending, right? And you mentioned Connor Hellebuyck before. I'm going to turn now to Sergei Bobrovsky because third period of game 3, through the overtime and into game 4, Bob is back. He looks like the guy that won a Stanley Cup last year. He's the guy that took the Florida Panthers on that run in 2023. He's in the heads of the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. And the Florida Panthers are back in this series 2-2, and it looks like the momentum is really shift to the Panthers, to the champs, because, man, Reinhardt's going, Barkov's going, Marchand's doing his thing against, well, he always does his thing against the Maple Leafs, let's be honest here. And now it's 2-2 headed back to Toronto, and there's a lot of questions on the Maple Leafs side.
So I teased before our talk with Mike Morreale that I had something interesting to say about this series. And I'm going to come out fire and hot right now, okay? And it sticks again with the whole mental side of the sport. The Toronto Maple Leafs are the mentally softest team that we have seen in the last 25 years in the National Hockey League. And you cannot convince me otherwise. Not even the New York Rangers are this mentally weak, okay? The Toronto Maple Leafs had a 2-0 lead in this series. Yes. 2-0 is not 3-0. It's not 4-0. Yes, 2-0 at home when you then have to go out on to the road. Yes, all those factors. The series was not over. But how do you, if you are a team that is supposedly different this year, Okay, you got rid of Sheldon Keefe. You brought in Fred Berube, who is supposedly that guy to make the difference, in terms of the team's mental mindset. And you have the defending champs reeling, okay? You have them where you are moments away from proverbially stepping on their neck and putting them out of their misery, okay? And you let them back into the series? It doesn't matter how well Bobrovsky played in the overtime and into Game 4. It doesn't matter how good Barkov is playing or that Marchand continues to kill the Leafs even though he's no longer a Boston Bruin. And let's be honest, Marchand should just wear instead of wearing like a Florida Panthers jersey or a Boston Bruin jersey, he should just wear a shirt that says, I hate Toronto and I kill Toronto and just be done with that.
Right.
But how are you going to let yourselves fall apart like that? And I know it's still a 2-2 series and it's going back to Toronto for Game 5. You can't do that. Okay? No. You cannot give up a 2-0 series. Yeah, if it's 1-0 in the series and the next team comes back and you trade, that's one thing. But to be up 2-0, you have to, like it is mandatory. You have to step on their neck and you have to take control. For them to not do that, Jim, they are the mentally softest team that we have seen in this millennium, in this century. And
they wasted a great performance by Joseph Woll in Game 4. Wasted. I mean, he stood on his head. He played great. He did everything he needed to do for the Maple Leafs to win that game, and the rest of the team didn't show up. Go back to Game 3. By the way, you're up 3-1 on the champs in Game 3. Fluky goal on a review. Gets them going. Bennett ties the game. You're trading goals, right? You needed some saves from Joe Woll. But again, Bobrovsky stops Nylander, Nyes, Matthews, Marner. He made all those great saves. Did it again. When it's 1-0 on Nyes in the third period. Like Matthew Nyes to me has been the best player in the Maple Leafs right now in this series along with William Nylander, who continues to just play great. But again, the Leafs lose an overtime game and then they completely no-show. Similar to the Ottawa series. I agree with you. When the champs are down, you got to take control of the champs and make sure and knock them out. You have to deliver that Mike Tyson knockout blow. You do, and Toronto didn't do it. They had a chance to take commanding 3-1 series lead. They could have been up 3-0 in this thing, and they didn't do it. And it's similar to what happened to LA, and LA found themselves now on the sidelines because they let the Edmonton Oilers find their game. And look, here we are.
I'm going to compare this to another series that actually, weirdly enough, follows a very similar pattern. Wasn't it just a couple of years ago that the New York Rangers went up 2-0 in the Eastern Conference Final and had I believe it was against, was it Tampa or was it Florida? I believe it was Florida.
It was Tampa 2-0 because they blew a 2-0 nothing lead against New Jersey the following year.
Right. So they go up 2-0 on Tampa, right? Tampa is still in their championship window, right? They go up 2-0 on them. Going into Game 3, they have a lead in Game 3. They lose that game. They lose the next game. It's 2-2. Guess what? They didn't win again in that series. Okay? And Tampa went on. Toronto, right now, they went up 2-0 on the defending champs. They had a lead in Game 3. They lose in Game 3. They lose Game 4. 2-0 becomes 2-2. I'm telling you right now, Toronto is not winning another game in this series. Toronto's season will be over by the time we have our next Blue Line Blast podcast episode next week.
Ooh, I like it. We're coming in with the hot takes tonight on this episode. Like I said, it's loaded. We got a ton of hot takes, ton of guests coming up. I mean, like I said, Mike Morreale came on. We got Kristy Flannery coming on as well with us. But Matthew Blittner with the hot take machine. I love it. I actually kind of agree with you. I think the champs have found something now. I think they're in their heads. I know we've always said it's a different Maple Leafs team. However, Let's see if that's truly a fact with the 2 days off, because can Craig Berube get the team in the right mindset? Can top players now be those top players? Because Toronto is in trouble. They're reeling, and they need to figure it out quick, because Anthony Stolarz is nowhere to be found because he's injured.
You want to talk about being in trouble, for the record? Carolina and Washington. Washington's in trouble in that series. They are getting a much bigger pushback from Carolina than I think anyone thought would happen. I think a lot of people thought that Washington was going to steamroll Carolina, and they're finding out exactly what the rest of the league has known about Carolina for a very long time. You do not steamroll the Carolina Hurricanes, and Washington is getting their what's handed to them.
Mm-hmm. They are. I mean, look, Carolina, we saw it first round with New Jersey, right? I mean, they play a certain style, aggressive forecheck. They're going to turn the puck over. It's similar to what the Devils did all those years ago when they won Stanley Cups. It's not, it's boring, but it's effective. It's winning hockey. That's what they do. But if you can get to their goaltender and you can score goals, that's the way to beat them. The problem is they don't allow you to do it. They take away shooting lanes. They block shots, and they throw pucks at the net constantly. They always outshoot their opponent. Their penalty kill is one of the best. It's limiting a great Washington power play right now. You look at Freddie Anderson, he's standing on his head. Logan Thompson's not playing bad in this series, but Washington cannot generate anything because Carolina's just taking away the middle of the ice. And, Carolina under Rod Brindamore plays a certain way. Everybody thinks they need this superstar. They don't. They have Andrei Svechnikov. They have Sebastian Aho. They get offense from their D. That's how they win games. It's not pretty, but it's effective.
Certainly effective and certainly not pretty. And, Jim, you made the comparison to, those great Devils teams from the 90s and 2000s. So what a great segue into our next guest, Kristy Flannery from the Hockey News, who is going to join us in just a moment to, continue our thread of Devils conversations today, with Mike Morreale from NHL.com. And, we do like to, talk Devils a lot on this podcast. So Kristy's going to join us in just a moment. And then when we come back from our chat with Kristy, Jim, I've got something that I want to talk to you about that I'm very curious as to how you're going to respond. Okay, so we're back now from our chat with Kristy Flannery from the Hockey News. Marked our second guest of the episode. Again, we like to thank Mike Morreale and Kristy Flannery for coming on today, making our first double guest spot a big one here. And Jim, before our chat with Kristy, I said that there was something I wanted to get your thoughts on that I thought was going to be a very interesting take. Now, have you had any chance to potentially dive into my mind to take a guess, or do you want me to just come right out with it?
I tried to get into your mind. It's not an easy place to get to. Guys, we like to have fun on this podcast. I've tried to search high and low for topics here. I can't find one. You might have to give it to me, or you give me a hint.
All right, so I'm going to give you this topic right now, and it's one that you actually probably were not expecting, okay? Over in the World Championships right now, Team USA on Monday lost to Switzerland, okay? Mm-hmm. Who is a team that Team USA should not be losing to at the World Championship, okay? Team USA needs to, and we saw this at Four Nations as well, where it seems like the U.S. hockey program is getting ready to take that step to unseat Canada as the number one in the world, but then they always seem to take that step back. Jim, Team USA needs to figure a way to attract players to them to come and play at these tournaments. Why is Hockey Canada able to get Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Marc-Andre Fleury, who was supposed to be retired, to come out and play for them at the World Championships. Okay?
Yeah.
Why is Team USA relying on Joey Daccord as their goaltender? Okay? Team USA, there's so much talent in the US now in hockey. They need to do a better job of convincing players to come and play for Team USA in these tournaments. So there's no excuse for Team USA to not be taking that next step to take their number one spot in the world in hockey.
I mean, Dylan Larkin talked about it, right? He said it. You referenced it. They need guys to come. Zach Werenski's finally on the list, right? But that's not enough. We know it's an Olympic year. Talking to general managers, you hear what Brian Burke said. He even tried to incentivize guys to go to the World Championships in Olympic years because they knew what was at stake to try to get chemistry, to see who you have. Unless you're injured, I get it. You don't want to go and play more hockey, but you listen to guys, you want to be playing more hockey because you've had a couple of weeks off. You want to be on the ice as much as possible. You want to train. You want to be in that zone. You could clearly see that from Team Switzerland's side of things, you've seen Siegenthaler's getting better because he's coming off the injury. Hischier and Meyer are locked in. Fiala's played in these big spots, right? Guys have been in the playoffs, and they're taking their next steps. Team USA needs their big guns at the World Championships. And I know it's not best on best, but this year it's pretty damn close to best on best because of what's coming up in February of 2026. You can say Captain America is playing in the playoffs. A lot of the top U.S. guys are playing in the playoffs right now. But Dylan Larkin saw it firsthand. Brian Burke has seen it. Guys have built these teams, have seen it. The issue is I don't think we see the World Championships as other nations do, and we don't see it as that important.
Look, Jim, forget about the importance for a second, okay? So that is obviously, and I hate to use the same word, that is very important. All these tournaments are very important, okay? But Team USA, they need, I don't know what it's going to take, but all the players in the league, regardless of US, Russian, Canadian, Swiss, Sweden, whatever it is, they fought very hard in the new CBA to make sure that there was an international calendar. We heard it nonstop, and we still hear it nonstop, that players want consistent international calendar, that they want to play for their country, that they want to win gold for their country, that for some of them it's bigger than winning the Stanley Cup. For others, it's just below it. Some of them it's equal to it. Jim, you taught the talk. Now you got to walk the walk. If you keep saying you want all these things and that it's so important to you, how are you then shirking away from it? It doesn't make sense.
No, it makes absolutely no sense. You want to like you said, everybody says, "Oh, I want to represent my country, a big stage. We want gold medals. We want all this stuff." Well, is Jeremy Swayman at the tournament? Is he playing goaltender for Team USA? Because he was the backup to Connor Hellebuyck. We know Jake Ottinger and Connor Hellebuyck are playing in the playoffs, so obviously they're not going. But you have so much talent from guys that didn't make the playoffs that aren't over there. There's a lot of great talent in the United States. Everybody's talking about how the U.S. has a great talent pool, but it seems every time these World Championships comes around, they want to bring the young guys. To a point, you need to, because it seems like the World Junior team and the women's team are the only teams that really can medal at these things. But at some point, you have to look at your national team development, your big team, and say, hey, wait a minute. We have to change our strategy, because when push comes to shove in the big moments, we're losing to Canada because they have chemistry, because all those guys are going to play over the World Championships. And like you said, take the importance out of it. I think USA Hockey has to look themselves in the mirror and say, hey, wait a minute. We need to do a better job. And I get it. A lot of these guys, most of these teams are filled with guys that play in the National Hockey League. and it's a long season, but you get a couple weeks off after your season's over if you don't make the playoffs. You have time to go over there, and I know you want to be away from your family a little bit more or whatever it is. But at some point, USA Hockey has to say to these guys, hey, you know what? Put it aside for a moment. If you really want to be on the Olympic team, or you really want to be, if we want to consider you on any of these teams, you have to play at the World Championships. If you don't, you will not be considered, period, end of story.
That's a great point. And, if the U.S. is going to be the new number one, and they're not yet, you can't only win gold or win medals at World Juniors and, for the women's team. You have to dominate. You have to clean sweep. You have to win gold at the Olympics. You have to win gold at men's at the World Championships. You have to win gold at the under 20s, at the World Juniors, at the under 18s, at the women's. You have to do it at all the events. You can't just do it at one or two. You have to take that step. And just like we said about how the Toronto Maple Leafs did not do this against the Florida Panthers, you have to step on the neck of your opponent and put them down and take control. Team USA, U.S. Hockey has so much talent. They have the ability to do that, but they refuse to do it for some reason we don't yet know. They need to do it. And Jim, that's the last I'm going to say on it before we start losing ourselves, because we're going to get a call from Team USA saying that we're being completely anti-patriotic, and we don't need that.
No, it's true. Look, I love USA Hockey. I think they do a great job, but they have to look themselves in the mirror when it comes to this tournament, because younger is not always better. Now, granted, the Olympics will be played on NHL ice. It will not be played on the sheet that they're playing on over in Sweden for the World Championships. So advantage NHLers. However, you need to build that chemistry. You can't put a team together and not practice and think you're all going to be well and come February. They have to really look at themselves when it comes to the World Championships. And I will disagree with you. I think Switzerland has taken so many strides at the World Championships. They play a style that US just doesn't, for some reason, want to play, similar to what Toronto doesn't want to do in the playoffs, even though we thought they could. But I agree with you on the point that says if you want to be a world powerhouse, you have to go to these big events and win. And the USA Hockey has not won a gold medal in a really, really long time, decades at these World Championships, and they rarely medal. So that has to change.
Yeah, look, there's nothing more to be said on this. Hopefully, Team USA can rebound from this. Jim, we've talked a lot of hockey today. Let's save a little something for next week. We've got some things coming up. And next week, I believe, I'll tease it right now. I believe we're going to be joined by Alan Trader from the New York Times. Well, no, sorry. Used to be New York Times, now from the Associated Press. We have some great guests coming up on the show. We've got Andrew Gross from Newsday, who covers the Islanders, coming up on, I believe, the 26th. And Colin Stevenson, Newsday, New York Rangers on June 2nd. All, coming up, and we'll have so many more great guests this summer. But Jim, take it away. Fire that last puck into the net.
Guys, it's a loaded episode of the Blue Line Blast podcast. Thank you again for tuning in to our venture here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like our video. Jim Biringer, Matthew Blittner. Thank you to our guest, Mike Morreale of NHL.com. Kristy Flannery of the Hockey News. Guys, we'll be back next week for another episode of our Blue Line Blast podcast. Take care and enjoy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're joined now by our second guest of the day. It's a big day here for the Blue Line Blast podcast. Go big or go home. Once more, I am co-host Matthew Blittner, Jim Biringer up above here as well. And we're joined now by Kristy Flannery from the Hockey News, who has covered the New Jersey Devils for, Kristy, what is this, 4 seasons now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, definitely someone who has been around the team quite a bit on a day-to-day basis from practice to games. Kristy, how does it feel to be here on such a big day for the show and in hockey in general?
It's so exciting, and I'm happy that you guys started this show. So this will be fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. And, to get things started with your expertise here, Kristy, at the end of last week, I believe it was Thursday morning, Sheldon Keefe and Tom Fitzgerald met with the media, or most of the media, to talk about, give their end of season press conferences. And there was some noteworthy things that were talked about. They mentioned how it wasn't nearly good enough of a season. It was a disappointment, that there will be changes. We saw some of those changes already, which we'll get into. What was your initial takeaway from the rather blunt aspect of how Keefe and Fitzgerald were talking?
I think the way that they saw things was the way that we saw things and how fans saw things, with the respect that, Keefe talked about his team's inability to sustain their game. We've all seen this, their inability to win more than 3 games in a row. I think most people would agree it was an average season. I think for me, you look at it and 100% it was an average season, but at the same time, the goal was to make the playoffs. Obviously, they missed the year prior. So to that regard, they did accomplish a goal. It just wasn't enough for everybody to walk away from the season saying it was a success.
Well,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Jim, sorry, take it away.
No, it just makes sense, because you look at it, right? And we've talked about this the whole year in conversations when we've been at the games, and we talk about playing a 60-minute game. And, Keefe was asked about the teams in the playoffs, and being average is just not good enough. And he mentioned 16, they're one of 16 teams that are, out. He meant 17 because they were the first team eliminated in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but no one can correct them during the press conference, but I'll do it here just because semantics, and, I have a bad habit of doing that. But, you look at it and we look at the roster itself and we talk about changes, and who are some of the players, because they have a lot of UFAs and they have some RFAs as well.
Yeah.
But looking at the UFAs, who do you think is going to come back, and who do you think is going to be finding another home?
As far as the RFAs or the UFAs, I'm sorry.
UFAs, the unrestricted free agents.
I got to be honest, and no one's going to like this answer, but when I look at the list, the one player that I am the most convinced is going to come back out of the UFAs is actually Justin Dowling, and no one's going to like that answer. But you have to remember, Justin Dowling did not make the Devils opening night roster. He was with the Comets and then was called up when the Curtis Lazar injury occurred, and he was serviceable in his role. I think for him, he's probably going to get a 2-way deal again because he proved that they definitely could use him in Utica. One of the problems with the Comets this year was the lack of faceoffs and the lack of possession they were able to get. So I think Dowling you're going to see back on probably a 2-way deal.
All right, so Kristy, in that regard to, some players who potentially have an impact from Utica, you mentioned Justin Dowling, but Simone Nemec and Seamus Casey, they were the ones who really, if you want to talk about impact from Utica, they're the names that you have to start with, whether it's this past season or, this upcoming season, who you would have to think would be the ones who would have the biggest impact. Now, obviously, they're both defensemen. There's not a ton of openings on the back end, but you never know what might happen. Obviously, Jonathan Tovasevich is going to miss the beginning of the season. And Luke Hughes, who knows what's going to happen, how long it might take him to actually get back into the swing of things after shoulder surgery. But, what do you see out of Nemec and Casey, and for them to actually make that significant impact? We saw Nemec in the postseason, and he really came alive. Just what do you see out of the two of them?
I think that they're two different players. I look at Simone Nemec, and I look at a player who could, be a power play guy if you need him to be. I think that him being on the penalty kill would really help and just add value to his resume. I look at him and I just see a player that really needs to have that rounded out defensive game and not be overly defensive like a Jonas Siegenthaler, but definitely be a guy that you can rely on defensively. Whereas I look at Seamus Casey, and he's so offensively gifted, and he's a guy that you're going to have out on the power play because of his skating, his ability to move, his vision. So when I look at them, I look at them as two different defensemen. And maybe I'm the only one that does that. But I think and a lot of people like sit down and like I'll get comments like, oh, you don't like Nemitz. And I'm like, the piece that you're missing is that with Nemitz, it's never been about talent. It's been about effort and urgency. And I think if you go back to that Winnipeg Jets game, which everyone probably knows which game I'm talking about, when Keefe said that type of player is in the wrong league. I think for that game, it was the lack of effort that you saw. You're going to get beat. That's going to happen. You're in the NHL. You're going to go up against players who are better than you. But the effort and the urgency is what I think was missing from him at certain points this year. And yes, he had the shoulder injury and we don't know how that affected him. But I don't think it's a lack of talent with him. I think it's as long as he's giving that effort and urgency, which you saw in the playoffs, you saw how dynamic he was in the postseason for the Devils. If he can bottle that and be that night in and night out, the Devils are in great shape with him.
Yeah, but talking about night in, night out, that feels like, you said it off the top. It's the consistency for the entire team. Like you look at it, the scoring, and I think that's a big issue for this team going into this offseason as well. It maybe, because everybody points to the comments, go back to Tom Fitzgerald last offseason. Well, we have enough offense. The offense will be there. And he mentions the depth scoring, and then he brings up the analytics department, whether it's 10 to 12, 20 goal scorers, is it 12, 10 goal scorers? The Devils don't have enough scoring, period, outside of the top two lines. And even in the top two lines, you can make an argument they're still missing a piece.
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, I always had the belief that going into the trade deadline, one of the pieces that Fitzgerald was looking for was a top six winger to play alongside Jack Hughes. Obviously, he did not find that. I'm assuming that's going to be at the top of the list again this offseason if one is available. I think as a general manager, I've talked to my husband about this. I think it's tough because obviously as a GM, you sign and give contracts to players that you believe in. You believe to a certain degree that they're going to perform to a certain standard. Obviously, up until the Christmas break, the Devils were doing very, very well. It was still a hole. There was still a lack of depth scoring, but everything else covered that up. And then you hit December, and now you're realizing, okay, now if nothing else is going right, this is a huge problem. And then there's the argument of should Fitzgerald have made a move in January before Jack got injured? And you can go back and forth. I think that there's a fine line between having confidence in the players that you already have and depending on how long the leash you need to give them to maybe figure it out versus pulling the plug saying, you know what, it's been too long. You're not doing what I need you to do. You're out. I think that's a tough balancing act as a general manager.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to turn your attention to two players in particular who received plenty of top 6 minutes this year and drew a lot of the ire from the fans, really. And I mean, obviously fans can be a bit irrational, because they see what they want to see. Whereas, when you're around the team on a day-to-day basis, you pick up on the little things and you can understand the ebbs and flows a bit more when emotion is not part of it. But Timo Meier and Dawson Mercer are very streaky players. That's just how they are. A lot of players across the National Hockey League and in all sports are streaky. That's why there's great players who are just always consistent, like a Sidney Crosby, and then there's very good players, and then there's good players. That's how players get separated into different tiers. Timo, once March came along and the playoffs, I mean, he was just a one-man wrecking ball. Mm-hmm. But Dawson Mercer, he had the flashes, but he still hasn't shown what he did a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. What's your take on them? And does Mercer, because they're not going to move Meier, is Mercer someone who, with the changes that they were talking about end of season, is he someone who might have some value in terms of bringing back multiple pieces? Because in order to get, you have to give. And if you just give up someone who's like a fork liner, like a Tatar type, like that's not going to get you back anything significant. But giving up a Mercer type might. And I'm not advocating for Mercer to go. But if changes are going to be made, you have to wonder where that's going to go.
Well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Barry Trotz who was talking about acquiring Mercer. And I think it was him that made the comment that, like, if you want to trade Mercer, I'll drive up to New Jersey and get him myself. I think he has a lot of value. I know Devils fans haven't really been happy with him, but I think I wasn't able to make Fitzgerald's post and Keefe's post game, not post game, end of season media availability for a family issue. But the one question I have for Fitzgerald is, when you look at a player like Dawson Mercer, do you feel that there is another level to him offensively? Or at this point, after 300 and something games, 4 seasons, he is offensively who he is, and where his true value is he's a responsible 200-foot player. He's going to help on the penalty kill. Like, I'm curious at this point how the organization views Dawson Mercer.
So, and Jim, sorry to cut you there, but I've got to ask. So, one person who I've talked a lot about the NHL threshold is, I've talked with Joe Micheletti a lot over the years, and congrats, Joe, on your announced retirement. He's always told me 300 games is the threshold for, when an NHL player will either show or not show what and who they are. The first, 100 games or so, they're getting their feet wet. The league is learning them. Then the second 100 games is sort of just like, can they make the adjustments? Does the league then adjust back to them? And then the third set of 100 games is where they really start to either fold under the pressure or start to thrive. Mercer's got those 300 games now. And, as you said, where is he going to be at right now with this? In your opinion, because you see him on a day in, day out basis, practice, games, everything, do you think that he has that extra level to give?
I mean, what kind of extra level are you talking about? Like, are you talking about, can he go from like a 30 to 40 point getter to like 50, 60? Like, where? Yeah,
just what would you say he has to give in that? I don't think anyone really expects him to all of a sudden blossom into, an 80 to 100 point guy. But, 50, 60 points is certainly a valuable player in the league.
I feel like he could probably get to the point where he can get to like a 45 point mark. But I look at Dawson as a player that is offensively a depth piece, that you're not going to really rely on him for offense on a nightly basis. But I think what makes Dawson valuable is his 200-foot game. And if you look at a guy like Daniel Sprong, everyone says, he has a great shot. He has a great shot. He hasn't really been able to find a home, as Keefe previously said, is because he had to work on his 200-foot game. You can look at a guy like Alexander Holtz, who was shot offensively, can shoot, can score goals. He was spent most of the time in the AHL because of his play away from the puck. So I think there is a lot of value to having Dawson in the lineup. I just don't know, if I was a general manager, if I would look at Dawson and say, okay, we need offense on a nightly basis. We need someone to consistently contribute. I don't know if Dawson would be somebody that I would put in that category, but I think there is still value to him on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. But, looking at the players' reactions too, we've talked about Fitzgerald and we've talked about Keefe and during their, end of year availabilities, but the players as well, they talked about, they want to get to another gear as well. They felt like they even underachieved this year. Yeah, you make the playoffs and everything. However, the leadership of Nico Hischier took another step. Jesper Bratt continues to take another step. But it, again, just the, not the ability, but it seems like the same tones like year to year over the last couple of years. And they're not taking injuries as an excuse. But it seems like, I think the biggest thing, and would you agree with this, the biggest thing that they all want to work on is consistency and playing a 60-minute game for next season?
Yeah, and I think I've had conversations like over the years about that. And, the answer I always get, every answer always starts with consistency is the hardest thing to get in the NHL. Like, it's just such a hard thing. But yeah, I mean, you need to have that consistency. You can't have everyone kind of like go black at the same time, because then you're going to get shut out. You're going to leave your goalie out to dry. But I think when I look at this roster, I think the biggest thing is you need more consistency in the lineup, because you had Paul Cotter, who started off really hot. You had Stefan Nason. He started off really hot. By the end of the season, both of them offensively cooled down a little bit. And now all of a sudden you have a third line going into the playoffs that's giving you nothing. So you need to have more consistency in the lineup just as a whole. You can't rely on Bratt, Hischier, and Hughes to get your goals. And I feel like for a majority of this season, once it hit past that Christmas break, that's basically what it was. If they weren't scoring, the team wasn't scoring.
So, scoring obviously was their issue, and we've talked about that plenty here today. But one thing that wasn't really an issue yet that seems set to change is their defense, their penalty kill, their special teams. We know that the special teams struggled in the playoffs, but short series, that's not really, in my opinion, that's not really indicative of how their special teams are, because again, small sample size. But throughout the regular season, they were top 3, top 4 in power play. They were top 10 penalty kill. Their defense, there were some times where they would get caved in defensively. But for the most part, they were a pretty solid defensive team this year. And now they let go, a couple of assistant coaches who, primarily were in charge of the defense and the special teams. Just what's your take on that? Because, there's making change in order to get better, but then it also seems like sometimes there's change for the sake of change. And while Sheldon Keefe has a right to have who he wants on his staff, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And it seems like he might be leaning in that way of trying to fix something that maybe wasn't broken.
Well, one, you can have your opinion on it, but you're not really seeing the full story. So I can give my opinion on the news that they're not bringing Ryan Miguel back, but I can't sit here and say I know the full story. There's always things that happen behind the scenes that nobody's aware of. And it could just be a simple fact that Sheldon might have somebody else in mind that he's previously worked with in the past, and he wants to give him a go and thinks that he can elevate it. It could be that simple. I was a little surprised by it, but I'm more curious if he's going to bring in somebody that he has familiarity with. I think that would kind of give some clarity to the reasoning. That's kind of all I have on that, to be completely honest with you.
No, but again, as Tom Fitzgerald said, the group wasn't good enough. There has to be change. What do you think the biggest thing and the biggest change might be this offseason for New Jersey?
I think they need depth players. I think that they need to figure out how to rediscover what they had with the BMW line, like a very effective fourth line. I think that's one of the biggest issues that they had. And I think that's kind of what you need. And I think those players are hard to come by. I think it's really hard to find players that are on a nightly basis effective playing 8 minutes a night. Because what nobody realizes, and I didn't know this either until I started talking to players, they said it's the hardest thing. When you're playing less than 10 minutes a night, they said, 1, you're freezing on the bench. They said, 2, there's so much time that passes in between your shifts that by the time you jump back on the ice, like you're kind of like frozen. You have to kind of immediately get back into the swing of things, whether it's, trying to defend an odd man rush or whatever it might be. And it actually was brought to my attention that TV timeouts were one of the worst things that's ever happened to fourth liners, because with that reset, you don't go for your fourth line. You always go for your top guys. So I think it's hard to get effective depth players, especially fourth line players. But if I was GM, that's what I would be looking for. I'd be looking for guys that can contribute and kind of take some pressure off of my top guys. Because I think there were times this season when I couldn't believe how much Mikko was being utilized. I was like, you got to give the kid a break at some point.
It's absolutely fair. And you bring up the interesting point about the TV timeout, potentially disrupting the flow for, the bottom 6 guys. And that's something that a lot of fans and a lot of people in general just don't really think about. It's one of those things they're like, oh, TV timeout, all right, time to go to the bathroom, time to get some popcorn, a beer, or whatever. And they don't really think about the nuance of it. So that's actually a very good point by you. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I'm going to ask you right now to step out of your writer role for a second and put on a teacher's hat for just a minute. Okay. You watched Sheldon Keefe and by extension Tom Fitzgerald all season. If you had to give each of them their own respective grade for this year as head coach and GM respectively, what would that be?
Oh God, these are so hard. They're hard because I don't know the full story. So I'm grading on just what I see, not necessarily maybe what reality.
Grading on a curve, just like all of us. That's how we passed, or that's how all of us passed through college.
I think Sheldon, I would give a B+.
Okay. Elaborate. Why?
I would give him a B+. I think he went in and accomplished the first goal that he needed to accomplish. which was getting the playoffs. But yeah, I'm going to go with a B+. And, you know, it's really hard with Tom because I think if fans, 'cause I know a lot of fans have a lot of opinions about how this season went. I think when you look at him, I think the injuries played a factor. And the only time I think you could really maybe sit down and quote unquote blame him, as the fans like to do, is about, you know, they came out of the Christmas break, wheels came off. Jack didn't get injured until March. So you had 2 months where you kind of let the team publicly, right? Publicly, what we saw is there was no changes to the roster. We don't know what was going on behind the scenes. We don't know if phone calls were made or anything like that. But publicly, he kept running out the same roster. I think the injuries changed everything. And I don't necessarily fault him for having the trade deadline that he had. I know some people will complain and say, well, he didn't help the team. One, like I said, we don't know what he was doing behind the scenes. But when you look back at it too, for me, when I looked at this roster from training camp, I thought if they can make it to the second round and be competitive in the second round, that would be a successful season to me. I never really thought they were a Stanley Cup contending team. I thought they were a playoff team. And for me, those are two different things. And when you look at a guy like Brock Nelson and Colorado traded top prospect, first round pick, third round pick, depth defenseman for Brock Nelson for the playoffs. Brock Nelson in 7 games had 0 goals. So now you can look back on it and sit down and say, what was Colorado doing? They gave up pieces that could really help them in the future for 7 games of Brock Nelson in the playoffs where he didn't really move the needle for Colorado. And I think if you look back, I think that Fitz would have been in that same category where maybe he gave up way too much and it didn't ultimately help. So I think I would give Tom, I would give him, like, they said it was an average season. I'll give him a C.
That's certainly fair. And, you know,
I think there's an argument, if you really think about it, about the injuries really did change things. And even if he made a move in January, February, I think he would have given up too much to get really nothing back to really help his team, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And, you know, we all know that the rumors were that they were potentially in on Mikko Rantanen, that they were potentially in on JT Miller. You know, if you look at how Rantanen did after he was traded both times, you know, it wasn't nearly what he is in the playoffs right now. If you look at JT Miller, he wasn't really that same guy. You know, he seems to have these weird alternating years where he'll have, you know, a stupendous year followed by just a good year. So, I am in full agreement with you that, you know, the injuries change things and that, you know, you might not have actually gotten anything that would have made a difference in regards to everything. So, again, you know, great points by you, Kristy. And, you know, for all of you out there, you know, Kristy's hockey news coverage of the Devils is second to none. So we highly encourage you to check that out. And Kristy, we do thank you so much for joining us on our first guest-filled episode of Blue Line Blast podcast.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, I could barely talk today, which really doesn't help when you're on a podcast, but...
No,
we appreciate it. We appreciate you coming on as always.
Okay, so we're back now from our chat with Kristy Flannery from the Hockey News. Marked our second guest of the episode. Again, we like to thank Mike Morreale and Kristy Flannery for coming on today, making our first double guest spot a big one here. And Jim, before our chat with Kristy, I said that there was something I wanted to get your thoughts on that I thought was going to be a very interesting take. Now, have you had any chance to potentially dive into my mind to take a guess, or do you want me to just come right out with it?
You know, I tried to get into your mind. It's not an easy place to get to. Guys, we like to have fun on this podcast. You know, I'm trying to search high and low for topics here. You know, I can't find one. You might have to give it to me, or you give me a hint.
All right, so I'm going to give you this topic right now, and it's one that you actually probably were not expecting, okay? Over in the World Championships right now, Team USA on Monday lost to Switzerland, okay? Mm-hmm. Who is a team that Team USA should not be losing to at the World Championship, okay? Team USA needs to, and we saw this at Four Nations as well, where it seems like the U.S. hockey program is getting ready to take that step to unseat Canada as the number one in the world, but then they always seem to take that step back. Jim, Team USA needs to figure a way to attract players to them to come and play at these tournaments. Why is Hockey Canada able to get Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Marc-Andre Fleury, who was supposed to be retired, to come out and play for them at the World Championships? Okay?
Yeah.
Why is Team USA relying on Joey Dacord as their goaltender? Okay? Team USA, there's so much talent in the US now in hockey. They need to do a better job of convincing players to come and play for Team USA in these tournaments. So there's no excuse for Team USA to not be taking that next step to take their number one spot in the world in hockey.
I mean, Dylan Larkin talked about it, right? He said it. You referenced it. They need guys to come. Zach Werenski's finally on the list, right? But that's not enough. We know it's an Olympic year. Talking to general managers, you hear what Brian Burke said. He even tried to incentivize guys to go to the World Championships in Olympic years because they knew what was at stake to try to get chemistry, to see who you have. Unless you're injured, I get it. You don't want to go play more hockey, but you listen to guys, you want to be playing more hockey because you've had a couple of weeks off. You want to be on the ice as much as possible. You want to train. You want to be in that zone. You could clearly see that from Team Switzerland's side of things, you've seen Siegenthaler's getting better because he's coming off the injury. Hischier and Meyer are locked in. Fiala's played in these big spots, right? Guys have been in the playoffs, and they're taking their next steps. Team USA needs their big guns at the World Championships. And I know it's not best on best, but this year it's pretty damn close to best on best because of what's coming up in February of 2026. You can say Captain America is playing in the playoffs. A lot of top U.S. guys are playing in the playoffs right now. But Dylan Larkin saw it firsthand. Brian Burke has seen it. Guys have built these teams, have seen it. The issue is I don't think we see the World Championships as other nations do, and we don't see it as that important.
Look, Jim, forget about the importance for a second, okay? So that is obviously, and I hate to use the same word, that is very important. All these tournaments are very important, okay? But Team USA, they need, I don't know what it's going to take, but all the players in the league, regardless of US, Russian, Canadian, Swiss, Sweden, whatever it is, they fought very hard in the new CBA to make sure that there was an international calendar. We heard it nonstop, and we still hear it nonstop, that players want consistent international calendar, that they want to play for their country, that they want to win gold for their country, that for some of them it's bigger than winning the Stanley Cup. For others, it's just below it. Some of them it's equal to it. Jim, you taught the talk. Now you got to walk the walk. If you keep saying you want all these things and that it's so important to you, how are you then shirking away from it? It doesn't make sense.
No, it makes absolutely no sense. You want to like you said, everybody says, "Oh, I want to represent my country, a big stage. We want gold medals. We want all this stuff." Well, is Jeremy Swayman at the tournament? Is he playing goaltender for Team USA? Because he was the backup to Connor Hellebuyck. We know Jake Ottinger and Connor Hellebuyck are playing in the playoffs, so obviously they're not going. But you have so much talent from guys that didn't make the playoffs that aren't over there. There's a lot of great talent in the United States. Everybody's talking about how the U.S. has a great talent pool, but it seems every time these World Championships comes around, they want to bring the young guys. To a point, you need to, because it seems like the World Junior team and the women's team are the only teams that really can medal at these things. But at some point you have to look at your national team development, your big team, and say, hey, wait a minute, we have to change our strategy, because when push comes to shove in the big moments, we're losing to Canada because they have chemistry, because all those guys are going to play over the World Championships. And like you said, take the importance out of it. I think USA Hockey has to look themselves in the mirror and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to do a better job. And I get it. A lot of these guys, most of these teams are filled with guys that play in the National Hockey League. And it's a long season, but you get a couple weeks off after your season's over if you don't make the playoffs. You have time to go over there. And I know you want to be away from your family a little bit more, or whatever it is. But at some point, USA Hockey has to say to these guys, hey, you know what? Put it aside for a moment. If you really want to be on the Olympic team, or you really want to be, if we want to consider you on any of these teams, you have to play at the World Championships. If you don't, you will not be considered, period, end of story.
That's a great point. And, if the U.S. is going to be the new number one, and they're not yet, you can't only win gold or win medals at World Juniors and, for the women's team. You have to dominate. You have to clean sweep. You have to win gold at the Olympics. You have to win gold at men's at the World Championships. You have to win gold at the under-20s, at the World Juniors, at the under-18s, at the women's. You have to do it at all the events. You can't just do it at one or two. You have to take that step. And just like we said about how the Toronto Maple Leafs did not do this against the Florida Panthers, you have to step on the neck of your opponent and put them down and take control. Team USA, U.S. Hockey has so much talent. They have the ability to do that, but they refuse to do it for some reason we don't yet know. They need to do it. And Jim, that's the last I'm going to say on it before we start losing ourselves, because we're going to get a call from Team USA saying that we're being completely anti-patriotic, and we don't need that.
No, it's true. Look, I love USA Hockey. I think they do a great job, but they have to look themselves in the mirror when it comes to this tournament, because younger is not always better. Now, granted, the Olympics will be played on NHL ice. It will not be played on the sheet that they're playing on over in Sweden for the World Championships. So advantage NHLers. However, you need to build that chemistry. You can't put a team together and not practice and think you're all going to be well and come February. They have to really look at themselves when it comes to the World Championships. And I will disagree with you. I think Switzerland has taken so many strides at the World Championships. They play a style that US just doesn't, for some reason, want to play, similar to what Toronto doesn't want to do in the playoffs, even though we thought they could. But I agree with you on the point that says, if you want to be a world powerhouse, you have to go to these big events and win. And the USA Hockey has not won a gold medal in a really, really long time, decades, at these World Championships, and they rarely medal. So that has to change.
Yeah, look, there's nothing more to be said on this. Hopefully, Team USA can rebound from this. Jim, we've talked a lot of hockey today. Let's save a little something for next week. We've got some things coming up. And next week, I believe, I'll tease it right now. I believe we're going to be joined by Alan Prater from the New York Times. Well, no, sorry. Used to be New York Times, now from the Associated Press. We have some great guests coming up on the show. We've got Andrew Gross from Newsday, who covers the Islanders, coming up on, I believe, the 26th. And Colin Stevenson, Newsday, New York Rangers on June 2nd. All, coming up. And we'll have many more great guests this summer. But, Jim, take it away. Fire that last puck into the net.
Guys, it's a loaded episode of the Blue Line Blast podcast. Thank you again for tuning in to our venture here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like our video. Jim Biringer, Matthew Blittner. Thank you to our guest, Mike Morreale of NHL.com. Kristy Flannery of the Hockey News. Guys, we'll be back next week for another episode of a Blue Line Blast podcast. Take care and enjoy.